before he sold the Eiffel Tower, before he convinced businessmen they could print their own money, before he asked Al Capone for $50,000 and walked away richer. Victor Lustig wrote down 10 rules. Be a patient listener. Never look bored. Let the other man reveal his politics. Let him reveal his religion. Never boast. Never get drunk. These rules were his operating instructions. Born on January 4th, 1890 in Hostinné, Bohemia, Lustig would go on to use more than 40 aliases. He would forge government documents, move counterfeit currency across the United States, associate with figures like Jack Legs Diamond, and escape from a federal prison using knotted bedsheets. By the time he died in 1947 in a prison hospital in Springfield, Missouri, federal agents estimated that more than $2 million in counterfeit bills had passed through his network. This is the life of Victor Lustig, also known as the Count, the man who built a career on illusion, discipline, and nerve. It started in a small town most people outside Central Europe have never heard of. Victor Lustig was born on January 4th, 1890 in Hostinné in the Kingdom of Bohemia, then part of Austria-Hungary. He was the second of 3 children born to Ludwig Lustig and Amelia, known as Fanny. The family lived in a modest 4-room house on Tiersevy Street near the central market square. They were German-speaking, middle-class, and Catholic. On paper, it looked stable. His father, Ludwig, sold tobacco goods and at one point served as mayor of Hostinné. But inside the home, stability had cracks. According to later accounts, Ludwig was physically abusive toward his wife and children. Fanny was 15 years younger than her husband. The imbalance of power inside that household was clear. At 8 years old, Victor was forced to sign a written oath promising he would abstain from alcohol and always attend church. It was an early lesson in performance, in signing your name to something you might not believe. He was also required to take violin lessons. He hated them. During one argument over practice, his father beat him over the head with the instrument. The scar he would later carry on his face came from another incident years later. But the violence started early. Around 1898, his parents divorced. Despite the legal separation, they continued living together at the time of the 1900 census. The tension inside that 4-room house did not disappear with paperwork. As a child, Lustig traveled frequently with his father on business trips to Prague and Zurich. He saw more of Europe than most boys his age. When he first saw Paris at 7 years old, he later recalled that the inner city looked exquisite, but the outer districts struck him as soiled and morally adrift. Even then, he observed cities the way a strategist studies a map, noticing both glamour and weakness. School did not bring him discipline. On his first day of infant school, he was expelled after telling a female teacher in crude German to kiss him. He was transferred to a 1-room school in Chermna, about 5 kilometers from Hostinné. Classmates later described him as headstrong and entertaining, someone who could mimic military leaders with expressive precision. A 1902 school report offered a colder assessment, describing him as morally deficient and intellectually lacking. By 13, he had taken up boxing. Despite chronic migraines and breathing difficulties caused by sinus swelling, he maintained perfect attendance. He endured discomfort quietly. He adapted. In 1904, he ran away from home for a week. He came back, but the departure said something. Restlessness had already taken hold. This was not yet the man who would sell the Eiffel Tower. This was a boy growing up in a fractured household, learning early how authority worked, how humiliation felt, and how appearance could be manipulated. The foundation was already there. By 1904, Victor Lustig was already pushing against the boundaries of his small Bohemian town. That year, he ran away from home for a week. The records do not describe where he went or how he survived during those days. What matters is that he left. He returned to Hostinné, but the message was clear. He was not built for confinement. After the incident, his family sent him to a boarding school in Dresden. It was a significant move both geographically and socially. Dresden exposed him to a more cosmopolitan environment, and more importantly, to languages. There, he learned English, French, Italian, and Hungarian. Some accounts claim he mastered 5 or even 6 languages. Whether the exact number can be confirmed or not, it is certain that by his late teens he could move between languages with ease. That skill would later become one of his sharpest tools. There is disagreement about how well he performed academically. His granddaughter, Bettina, later claimed that he excelled and remained in school into his early 20s. Most biographers disagree. They state that he dropped out before his 17th birthday. His childhood friend Carl Harrer provides a clearer turning point. In June 1906, after receiving a poor grade on a design portfolio, Lustig returned to Hostinné. Harrer recalled the two of them getting drunk together while Lustig complained about the elitist attitudes at the boarding school and what he saw as the general unfairness of the world. The resentment was already forming. He felt underestimated. He believed the system favored others. In 1907, Harrer began receiving postcards from Lustig mailed from Vienna. In his final correspondence, Lustig claimed he would study law at Charles University in Prague. Whether he formally enrolled or completed any sustained legal study remains uncertain. What is clear is that he was drifting between cities, constructing versions of himself as he went. By 1909, he appeared in Paris and began a semester at the Sorbonne. That same year, he took to gambling. The habit was more than recreation. It was training. Card tables and betting rooms taught him how men reacted to risk, to loss, to pride. They taught him how to read faces. During this period, he received the scar that would become one of his defining physical features. The wound came from a jealous boyfriend or husband, according to some accounts, of a woman Lustig had been involved with. The scar ran along the left side of his face. It did not disfigure him. It marked him. Paris in 1909 was alive with ambition and vice. For a young man fluent in multiple languages, comfortable with deception, and already resentful of authority, it was an education of a different kind. By the end of this chapter of his life, the structure of a conventional career had dissolved. Law school faded into gambling rooms. Design studies gave way to improvisation. He was no longer a troubled student from Bohemia. He was becoming something else. By the early 1910s, Victor Lustig had stopped pretending he was headed toward a conventional profession. The classroom was behind him. The gambling tables had shown him something important. Money did not belong to the strongest or the smartest. It belonged to the man who could control a room. He found that room at sea. Lustig began operating aboard transatlantic ocean liners, traveling between France and New York City. These ships carried industrialists, investors, entertainers, and businessmen with long hours to fill and money to risk. The setting was ideal. Passengers were removed from their offices and advisors. They were relaxed, flattered by attention, and open to opportunity. Lustig would introduce himself as a theatrical producer. He spoke fluent English and French, sometimes Italian or Hungarian, depending on his audience. He dressed the part, carried himself with assurance, and spoke in measured tones about an upcoming Broadway production. The show did not exist. The scripts were imaginary. The contracts were promises that would never be honored. He would describe projected profits, theater bookings, and casting prospects. He understood that investors were not buying a play. They were buying access, status, the thrill of being involved in something artistic and potentially lucrative. He let them feel chosen. The confidence game on an ocean liner had a built-in escape plan. By the time the ship docked in New York or Le Havre, the social circle dissolved. Names could be altered. Identities shifted. He could disembark, vanish into the city, and board another vessel weeks later under a different alias. During this period, he refined his method. He listened more than he spoke. He observed political opinions, religious beliefs, social anxieties. He mirrored them back. He made his marks feel understood. Then the First World War disrupted everything. When transatlantic liner services were suspended in the wake of the war, the floating marketplace disappeared. The steady flow of wealthy travelers slowed to a halt. Lustig needed a new stage. He chose the United States. Rather than treating America as a temporary hunting ground, he relocated his operations there more permanently. The country was expanding economically. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Kansas City were alive with speculation and ambition. It was a landscape built on risk. For a man who survived on illusion, it was fertile ground. By May of 1922, Victor Lustig was no longer working small rooms or floating casinos. He was moving through the American Midwest under borrowed names, testing how far confidence alone could carry him. That spring, he arrived in Springfield, Missouri, using the alias Robert Duvall. Springfield was a growing regional hub, anchored by banks eager to handle post-war investments. Liberty bonds issued during World War I to finance the American war effort were widely circulated and trusted. Lustig understood the psychology behind them. They symbolized patriotism, stability, and federal backing. He entered a local bank and arranged to purchase a parcel of land. He paid with Liberty bonds. The transaction appeared legitimate. The bonds were accepted, and because the amount exceeded the cost of the property, the bank provided him with $10,000 in cash as change. Then Lustig did something characteristic. Before leaving, he pocketed the Liberty bonds as well. By the time the discrepancy was discovered, he was gone. The scheme was simple in structure and bold in execution. It relied on timing, composure, and the assumption that no one would question a well-dressed man conducting business with confidence. There was no elaborate machinery, no forged government stationery, no theatrical performance, just paperwork, bonds, and nerve. Authorities eventually tracked him to New York City. He was arrested there and extradited back in connection with the Missouri fraud. The extradition was authorized by Governor Nathan L. Miller of New York, a detail that signaled something important. Lustig was no longer a minor nuisance drifting between cities. His name was beginning to circulate through official channels. Around this time, law enforcement agencies started recognizing patterns. Multiple aliases, multiple states, similar methods. He was building a record. The Springfield fraud did not end his career, it sharpened it. Each arrest taught him something about procedure, about jurisdiction, about how far an alias could stretch before it snapped. His reputation among law enforcement grew during these years, but so did his confidence. He was learning that even when caught, survival was possible. And survival, to Victor Lustig, was proof of talent. In 1925, Victor Lustig returned to Paris, the city he had first seen as a child and later as a restless student. He was staying there when he came across a newspaper article discussing the growing cost of maintaining the Eiffel Tower. The structure, built for the 1889 exposition, required constant upkeep, paint, structural repairs, public criticism. The article mentioned that some Parisians questioned its aesthetic value and hinted that the expense of preserving it was becoming a burden. For most readers, it was civic debate. For Lustig, it was opportunity. He studied the details carefully. The key was not whether the French government truly intended to dismantle the monument. The key was that such an idea sounded plausible if presented quietly, behind closed doors, framed as a confidential administrative decision. He hired a skilled forger to create official-looking government stationery. The letterhead identified him as Deputy Director General of the Ministère de Poste et Télégraphe, the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. It was a credible choice. The tower had originally served as a radio transmission structure, which placed it loosely within the ministry's sphere of authority. Once prepared, Lustig invited a select group of scrap metal dealers to a private meeting at an expensive Paris hotel. The invitation stressed confidentiality. The matter was politically sensitive. Public disclosure, he explained, would cause outrage. The men arrived expecting something significant. Standing before them in formal attire, composed and articulate, Lustig explained that the government had quietly decided the Eiffel Tower had become too expensive to maintain. He spoke about the rising cost of repainting, about public complaints, about the monument's uneasy place among Paris landmarks like the Gothic cathedrals and the Arc de Triomphe. His argument carried just enough cultural insight to feel authentic. He told them he had been tasked with selecting the firm that would dismantle the tower and purchase it as scrap metal. Their reputations as respectable businessmen, he said, were the reason they had been chosen. Among them was André Poisson, a scrap dealer eager to rise within Parisian business circles. Poisson lacked the established pedigree of some competitors. He wanted legitimacy. He wanted entry into elite company. Lustig saw the insecurity immediately. After receiving sealed bids, he arranged a private meeting with Poisson. In that conversation, he shifted tone. He confided that government service did not provide the income necessary for the lifestyle he preferred. The implication was clear. A bribe would secure the contract. Poisson agreed. He paid approximately 70,000 francs for the supposed rights to dismantle the Eiffel Tower, along with a substantial bribe to ensure the deal went through. Once the funds were in his possession, Lustig left Paris and fled to Austria. He anticipated that Poisson, humiliated by his role in such a grand deception, would hesitate to contact the police. Reporting the crime meant admitting he had attempted to bribe a government official to purchase one of the most recognizable monuments in France. Lustig monitored the newspapers while abroad. No headlines, no public scandal. The silence confirmed his calculation. He had sold the Eiffel Tower, and for the moment, the city said nothing. From Austria, Victor Lustig kept his eye on Paris. He read the newspapers carefully, scanning for any mention of scandal, arrest warrants, or public outrage connected to the Eiffel Tower. There was nothing. André Poisson had remained silent, whether out of embarrassment, fear of exposure, or simple disbelief. He had not gone to the police. For Lustig, that silence was confirmation. Later in 1925, he returned to Paris with the same forged credentials, the same government letterhead, and the same premise. The Eiffel Tower, he would explain again, was too costly to maintain. The government wished to sell it discreetly. The transaction had to remain confidential to avoid public backlash. He assembled another group of scrap metal dealers, repeating the process that had worked before. He rented an upscale hotel suite. He presented himself once more as Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. He delivered the pitch with the same authority and detail. Again, he identified a promising target among the group, someone receptive to the idea of securing a lucrative contract under confidential terms. But this time, something shifted. One of the dealers became suspicious. Whether it was the scale of the claim, the tone of the request, or simple instinct, the man chose to contact the authorities rather than negotiate privately. The police were alerted before the deal could be finalized. Lustig sensed the danger quickly. He did not wait for warrants. He did not linger to negotiate his way out. He left Paris before the investigation could close around him. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public arrest in a hotel lobby. He slipped out quietly, just as he had arrived. France was no longer safe territory. He crossed the Atlantic and returned to the United States, where his name was less tied to the Eiffel Tower and where opportunity still outweighed scrutiny. The first sale had been audacious. The second attempt taught him something equally valuable. Even the boldest illusion has a shelf life. By the mid to late 1920s, Victor Lustig had moved beyond forged contracts and imaginary government authority. He began selling something far more seductive. He called it the Rumanian Box. The device was presented as a currency duplicator. It was built from polished mahogany, roughly the size of a small steamer trunk. It had two narrow slots, one for inserting paper currency and another for blank sheets. Inside were gears and levers that appeared mechanical and complex. The design suggested precision. It looked expensive. It looked scientific. Lustig would begin the demonstration calmly. He would ask the potential buyer for a specific bill, often a $100 note. The bill would be inserted into one slot. Blank paper would go into the other. Then came the delay. The machine, he explained, required 6 hours to complete its duplication process. The waiting period was part of the illusion. It implied chemical development, mechanical pressure, intricate replication. During this time, Lustig would remain patient. He talked easily. He answered questions. He encouraged anticipation. What the buyer did not know was that the box had already been loaded with a genuine bill matching the denomination requested. When the time came, the machine would produce a fresh note. Lustig would then take the buyer to a bank to authenticate it. The bill would pass inspection because it was real. Once convinced, the mark would purchase the device for an exorbitant price. believing he now possessed the ability to print unlimited money. Lustig always ensured the machine contained a few additional genuine bills, timed to emerge hours apart. By the time the box stopped producing authentic currency and revealed itself as a hollow contraption, he was gone. One of the more notable victims was a Texas sheriff. The lawman paid thousands of dollars for the machine. When he eventually realized he had been deceived, he tracked Lustig to Chicago. Cornered, Lustig did what he did best. He reframed the problem. He convinced the sheriff that the machine was not defective, that it required more careful operation. As a gesture of good faith, he handed over a large sum of money as compensation. The bills were counterfeit. That decision carried consequences beyond a single angry victim. Passing counterfeit currency elevated the matter from fraud to a federal offense. It brought the attention of federal agents who were far less patient than local authorities. The Rumanian Box solidified Lustig's reputation as one of the most inventive con artists of his era. It also drew him closer to a different category of crime. Counterfeiting was no longer a prop in a confidence trick. It was becoming a business. By the summer of 1929, Victor Lustig was moving between continents again, still trading on aliases and borrowed authority. On July 5, 1929, French authorities arrested him in Paris alongside an associate named William McSherry. At the time, Lustig was traveling under the name Robert Miller, one of dozens of identities he would use throughout his career. The charge was attempted fraud involving fake stocks. When police searched them, they found forged identification papers, fraudulent letters of credit, and one of Lustig's signature devices, a money box similar to the so-called Rumanian Box he had used to swindle investors elsewhere. The pattern was familiar: official-looking documents, financial instruments that did not exist, machinery designed to impress. During questioning, Lustig and McSherry made a calculated move. They claimed to be affiliated with the organization of Chicago crime boss Al Capone. In 1929, Capone's name carried weight across the Atlantic. Associating with him could intimidate investigators or at least complicate matters. It suggested connections, protection, reach. The claim did not hold. Chicago police were unfamiliar with Lustig. When reporters asked Capone's associate Jake Guzik about the two men, he responded bluntly that he had never heard of them. Other unnamed gang members echoed the denial. There was no confirmation that Lustig operated under Capone's direction at that time. Still, the attempt to invoke Capone's name reveals something important. Lustig understood the power of reputation. Even if he was not formally tied to the Chicago outfit, he was comfortable letting authorities believe he moved in those circles. By 1929, he was no longer a lone operator drifting from scheme to scheme. He was brushing against the edges of organized crime, whether by design or convenience. The Paris arrest did not end his career. Like many of his earlier arrests, it became another entry in a growing record, and that record was beginning to stretch across borders. By 1930, Victor Lustig was no longer operating on the margins of organized crime. His path had begun to intersect directly with some of the most volatile figures of the Prohibition era. On July 15, 1930, federal agents raided Manhattan's President Hotel. They were searching for the notorious gangster Jack Legs Diamond, a bootlegger known for surviving multiple assassination attempts and for his involvement in liquor smuggling during Prohibition. When agents entered, they found Diamond meeting with Victor Lustig and an associate named Abraham Limas. All three men were arrested. The arrest did not hold for long, there was a lack of witness identification, and they were released shortly afterward. But the meeting itself drew attention. Lustig was no longer just a con man selling imaginary assets. He was sitting at the same table as one of New York's most prominent underworld figures. A month later, Diamond departed for Europe. Reports indicated he was overseeing a $250,000 investment tied to liquor and narcotics operations. Federal memoranda later placed Lustig aboard a White Star Line vessel traveling across the Atlantic around the same time. On that voyage were several suspected underworld figures: Charles Green, who used the alias Entrata, Salvatore Archidiaco, identified in documents as Lucania, widely believed to be Charles Lucky Luciano, and another individual known only as Traeger. Aside from Entrata, who reportedly did not continue with the venture, the others, including Lustig, arrived in Antwerp. Diamond took a separate ship but was arrested in Germany and sent back to Philadelphia. The transatlantic plan appeared fractured. Whatever the original objective had been, whether narcotics distribution, liquor investments, or financial maneuvering, it was already unraveling. On October 12, 1930, Diamond was shot 4 times at the Monticello Hotel in New York City, in what authorities described as a botched assassination attempt. The attack fueled speculation. Some suspected Al Capone. Others pointed toward remnants of Arnold Rothstein's faction, including traffickers Oscar Kirschon and Charles Cook. Many theories revolved around narcotics money and disputed investments. During the investigation, Diamond remained largely silent while recovering from his wounds. His mistress, Kiki Roberts, spoke more freely. She told police that Lustig and Arcidiaco had met with Diamond earlier that same day. Lustig and Arcidiaco were detained briefly. Both admitted they had been in Europe during the earlier venture. Lustig claimed he had been in Paris when Diamond was arrested in Germany and believed the operation had been cancelled. Arcidiaco offered vague explanations about a failed business arrangement. Letters later surfaced showing Diamond pleading with Lustig for financial and legal assistance. The correspondence suggested that their relationship was not incidental. There was a level of trust, or at least mutual reliance. Records confirm that Luciano had registered in Antwerp during the European trip, though he was never formally questioned in connection with the shooting. His name circulated in press coverage regardless. By this point, Lustig's world had shifted. He was no longer only manipulating businessmen and small-town bankers. He was moving through a network that included bootleggers, racketeers, and suspected narcotics traffickers. The line between con artist and organized crime associate was becoming harder to define. When the Great Depression tightened its grip on the United States, even men at the top of the criminal ladder felt the pressure. By the early 1930s, Al Capone was one of the most powerful figures in American organized crime. Based in Chicago, he controlled vast bootlegging operations and maintained influence over gambling and prostitution rackets. He was wealthy, heavily guarded, and accustomed to betrayal. Victor Lustig understood that approaching a man like Capone required precision. This was not a banker in Missouri or a scrap dealer in Paris. A mistake here could end in a shallow grave. According to accounts from the period, Lustig requested a meeting and presented Capone with a business proposal. He claimed he needed $50,000 to finance a lucrative scheme. The details of the supposed venture remain unclear in the record. What is documented is the amount and the risk. $50,000 in the early 1930s represented a substantial sum. Capone agreed to provide the money. Lustig did something unexpected. He placed the entire $50,000 in a safe deposit box and left it untouched for 2 months. There was no scheme, no investment, no attempt to multiply the funds. After the waiting period, he returned to Capone and reported that the deal had collapsed. He handed back the full $50,000 intact. To Capone, this signaled something rare. In a world defined by deception and double crosses, Lustig appeared honest. He had controlled a large sum of money and returned it voluntarily. Then, Lustig delivered the second part of his plan. He explained that the failure of the deal had left him financially strained. He had invested time and effort and now found himself without resources. Capone, believing he was dealing with a man of integrity, reportedly gave him $5,000 to help him recover. Some sources suggest the figure may have been closer to $1,000, but most accounts settle on $5,000. The brilliance of the maneuver was in its restraint. Lustig did not attempt to steal from Capone. He engineered a situation in which Capone felt compelled to reward him. Whether this episode strengthened a lasting relationship between the two men remains debated. There is no firm evidence that Lustig operated under Capone's direct authority. What is clear is that he walked away from the encounter alive and with thousands of dollars in profit. In the underworld of the Great Depression, that outcome alone speaks to his skill. He had gambled with one of the most dangerous men in America. And he had won. By 1930, Victor Lustig had moved beyond theatrical scams and symbolic cons. He entered a business that required infrastructure, precision, and silence. That year, he formed a partnership with two men from Nebraska, William Watts, a pharmacist, and Tom Shaw, a chemist. Watts and Shaw possessed technical skills Lustig did not. They understood engraving, inks, plates, and the delicate balance required to imitate United States currency convincingly. The arrangement was clear. Watts and Shaw would produce the counterfeit bills. Lustig would handle distribution. Printing plates were engraved with care. The quality of the bills earned them a reputation among investigators. The counterfeits were not crude reproductions. They were good enough to circulate widely without immediate detection. Lustig structured the operation to protect himself. He organized a network of couriers who distributed the counterfeit money across various cities. The couriers were kept deliberately ignorant of the source of the bills. Compartmentalization was key. If one link failed, the others would not necessarily unravel. Each month, thousands of dollars in counterfeit currency entered the American economy. The money became known in some circles as Lustig money. For nearly 5 years, from 1930 through 1935, the operation continued with remarkable success. During this period, Lustig maintained other connections as well. He had relationships within the underworld, including ties to figures who operated in gambling and vice. His personal life remained complicated. He kept a family in the Midwest while conducting affairs elsewhere. He moved through New York, Kansas City, and other cities, shifting identities as needed. By 1935, he had accumulated 38 arrests on his record. Many had ended in dismissal, reduced charges, or negotiated outcomes. His ability to talk, bribe, or maneuver his way out of confinement reinforced his confidence. But counterfeiting at this scale created a different kind of risk. As more bills entered circulation, federal agents began noticing patterns. The volume was too high to ignore. Serial numbers repeated. Geographic clusters emerged. The Secret Service, responsible for protecting the integrity of U.S. currency, intensified its focus. The operation that had sustained him for 5 years was becoming visible. For a man who had built his life on illusion, visibility was the real danger. By 1935, Victor Lustig had survived dozens of arrests, crossed borders under false names, and circulated counterfeit money across the United States. What finally closed in on him was not a dramatic sting operation, but betrayal. One of the central figures in this final chapter was May Scheibel, known in Pittsburgh as Number One Madam. She operated a high-end brothel in the Oakland district and had long-standing ties within the underworld. Scheibel and Lustig had history. At one point, he had even conned her into purchasing fake bonds, later returning the money. Their relationship continued despite that deception. According to former Secret Service agent Frank Seckler, tensions escalated in 1935 when Lustig borrowed Scheibel's car to take another woman out. Some accounts suggest the woman may have been connected to William Watts. Shortly afterward, federal authorities received an anonymous tip. Another version claims someone mailed a locker key with instructions. Investigators suspected Scheibel was the informant, though definitive proof never surfaced. On May 10, 1935, federal agents arrested Lustig in New York. At the time of his arrest, he carried little incriminating evidence. But the key found in his possession changed everything. It opened a locker in the Times Square subway station. Inside, agents discovered $51,000 in counterfeit bills and the printing plates used to manufacture them. The evidence tied him directly to the counterfeiting operation. Lustig was held at the Federal House of Detention in New York, known as the Tombs. On September 1, 1935, the day before his trial, he staged one final act of defiance. Feigning illness, he gained a degree of privacy in his cell. Using bedsheets tied together into a rope, he climbed out of a third-story window and escaped. The escape made headlines. Authorities circulated Department of Justice notices nationwide. His disappearance lasted 27 days. Federal agents began wiretapping May Scheibel's phone and tracking known associates. An unnamed informant provided additional intelligence. On September 28, 1935, agents located Lustig in Pittsburgh's North Side. He had been seen leaving Lane's Stag Hotel and entering a chauffeured car. Officers intercepted him a block away. The Pittsburgh Press reported that he had shaved his pointed mustache and drawn adhesive tape over his distinctive cheek scar in an effort to alter his appearance. When arrested, he reportedly shrugged and said, "Well, boys, here I am." He was briefly held in Allegheny County Jail before being extradited to New York. In December 1935, Lustig stood trial alongside William Watts. Watts chose to cooperate with prosecutors and turned state's witness. He received a 10-year sentence. Lustig refused to name accomplices. At one point, he told his lawyer, "All I wanted was to see if that rat would really squeal." The court sentenced him to 20 years in federal prison. He was sent to Alcatraz Island in California, the most secure federal penitentiary in the country. Behind the walls of Alcatraz, Lustig filed more than 1,000 medical complaints. Most were dismissed. Over time, his health visibly declined. Eventually, authorities transferred him to the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. On March 9, 1947, he contracted pneumonia. 2 days later, on March 11, 1947, at 8:30 p.m., Victor Lustig died. The official cause was pneumonia related to a brain abscess. On his death certificate, under the name Robert V. Miller, his occupation was listed as apprentice salesman and counterfeiter. His death was not publicly confirmed until 1949, when his brother Emil appeared in a New Jersey courtroom on counterfeiting charges. When asked if he had a brother known as the Count, Emil answered simply that Victor had been his only brother. Federal authorities later reported that they had recovered $2,340,000 in counterfeit currency attributed to Lustig and his network. They acknowledged they did not know how much might still be in circulation. In the end, the man who sold the Eiffel Tower, who claimed ties to Capone, who moved through Europe and America under dozens of aliases, died in a prison hospital under an assumed name. Not as a count, not as a mastermind, as an inmate number in a federal ward with the last of his illusions finally gone.